Hello and welcome. In this episode of My Time with Radha, I speak with Tara about her experiences with Swami Radha and her love for the teachings. We speak about the difference between compassion and being nice, as Tara reflects on Swami Radha's fierce compassion. I hope you enjoy listening. Hello and welcome. I'm here today with Tara, who's joining us from Victoria, British Columbia. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Tara. Hello.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Thank you. And I'm so excited. I always start with this phrase of, I asked the interviewee what prayer they would like to say. And so far, most people have gone with the Divine Mother prayer, but you picked the universal prayer. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, it's very meaningful in my life. It is a daily expression, but it's also a daily guidance to me. And it's just a prayer I really feel.
Amazing. So we'll say that together.
O adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation and to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember thee. Let us ever sing thy glories. Let thy name be on our lips. And let us abide in thee forever and ever.
Thank you. That was great. Let us serve thee in all these names and forms. That's a great way to start, I think, our talk together. And I already was saying this to Tara before we hit record, but as I was setting up here in this little studio that I record in, I was kind of thinking about how we're having this conversation together and how thus far, everyone who I've interviewed, I had kind of already known in part their relationship with Swami Radha. And of course, I always learn new things in all the conversations that I have with different folks. But in this situation, I've only met you, Tara, once very briefly at the ashram. And so to have this conversation, like, all the things that I'm asking you, I'm hearing the stories for the first time. And so it's really exciting for me to not only get new glimpses of Swami Radha, but now also gain new glimpses of you and your journey. So thank you so much for being here with me today. And my first question for you is, I wondered if you could kind of speak a little bit about the beginnings for you in relationship to the ashram and Swami Radha's teachings. Where did it all begin?
Well, it all began in the very fertile soil of a little city in southern Alberta, Lethbridge, Alberta. And several women had formed a women's center. So this was the heady days of the 1970s, the women's movement, and several people came together. I have to drop a few names here because among those women, I will drop the names of Susan, Marianne, Irene, and Barbara. And although there were several, those will stand out today because we know them today as Swami Jyotiananda, Swami Radhananda, Kali, and Tara. So it was Susan, Swami Jyotiananda, who first led the way to the ashram. Swami Radhananda followed very quickly, and Swami Lalitananda, known then as Julie, was not very far behind that. So that was the introduction to the ashram.
That's right. Yeah, a very kind of close-knit Alberta community has emerged then to the ashram.
Well, and it's always struck me that we had this women's consciousness raising brought us together. We all center around a woman guru, and little did we really know what kind of consciousness raising we were actually embarking on at the time. So,
right, yes, because if I'm correct, it started off as kind of like you said, a women's group, and it wasn't actually even associated with Swami Radha.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah, and then now here we are, so many years later with, Swami Radhananda, who was then Marianne, who was the president of the ashram for many years, and now Swami Lalitananda, and you and others still so actively involved. It's really incredible how it's come along.
Well, and how really fertile it was.
You were all, I imagined you all as like flowers, and the sun is coming and you're all like opening up to the to the sun, to the light.
That is the history. That's the era. The
Right.
flowers on the vans and the hair that stands out sort of
The
all
rainbows.
around us. And
yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And so it was kind of through that group then. And was it the first time you kind of encountered the teachings? Was it at the space of the ashram, or was it Swami Radha coming on a tour? Because I know she was doing quite a few of those outreach events.
She did travel a lot. And so when I actually was introduced to the ashram, it was in the spring, May of 1979. And Susan, Swami Jyotiananda, had just finished her YDC. It was called the YTC, the teacher's course in those days. And Marianne and I were going to go out and visit the ashram, and participate in the dream workshop. And I think I have to say here that it was, I think it'd be really hard for people today to understand those times, because it was really, really unusual for there to be an ashram in the Kootenays run by a woman. The whole yoga as a lifestyle practice was emerging, but hadn't reached the kind of common understanding that it has today. And certainly swamis and ashrams were not the sort of stuff of general life. And we weren't as consciously, and I think wonderfully, a multicultural country as we now are. So, we've opened up on many levels. And certainly in that time, it was quite a thing to be traipsing off in a Volkswagen van to go to the ashram, to go with a Swami and have a weekend dream workshop. So I really feel that it's a very different time, and gratefully it's a different time. So yeah, Marianne, Swami Radhananda, and I were going to go out and do this dream workshop. And I had a bit of a rocky start because Marianne suddenly disappeared. She was not my roommate, which certainly was an expectation I had, was that we would be together for the weekend. And instead, I was met by a roommate who had come into the room before me and lined up countless heart medications on the windowsill, met me at the door, telling me what I needed to do if she had a heart attack. So this was not exactly the dreamy weekend in the mountains of BC that I had thought I was going into. And I panicked and fled out into the hallway where Susan was vacuuming. Now, she'd been at the ashram for 5 months, and really, there was nowhere else in the world she would rather have been, and there was nowhere anything else that she would rather have been doing than vacuuming. And I come out with this tale of woe. So, of course, with the vacuum cleaner turned off and intently listening to me, she then smiled beatifically and said, "Barbara, when you come to a place like this, you need to suspend judgment." Well, I was not particularly placated by that. And it still hadn't met Swami Radha. So the workshop was starting that night, a Friday evening. And there was quite a large group actually gathered. And Swami Radha was, we all gathered before she did, was a large group. And she entered, and with her was a male assistant, a little white dog, and she was wearing very large sunglasses. So there's the first impression. And then I have to say this was in Saraswati classroom. So it's all pretty white and clear. And the sun was setting. That sunbeam was all around her. And that beautiful white hair just seemed to flow out and make this white aura all around her. And before she walked into the room, or as she walked into the room, there was this buzzy feeling and a lot of electric energy. And she walked in and sat down, and it became utterly silent. It was just remarkable. Everyone anticipating. She seemed completely oblivious to the kind of stir that she'd caused in all of us. And she basically was there. She had work to do, and it was to bring us into the light that I think everybody had experienced, even as she walked into the room.
What a moment.
So she talked about the dream method, and she told us to go away and dream, and I did.
That first night you dreamt?
Yep, the first night, yep. Yes, so I dreamt the first night. I did, and time does wonderful things at the ashram. I had time to do a little bit of work on it before we went the next morning. We'd been told about the initial interpretation, the feelings, etc. And so then we gathered in the morning, and there were 2 people who went in that first portion of the morning. The second dream that was talked about, the focus of the dream, the questioning on the dream was about the dreamer placed her dream either on or in proximity to reservations, as she was non-Indigenous. And so the questioning focused on, what are your reservations? And I was sitting there absolutely incredulous at this unfolding of insightful questioning that I really had never witnessed at any point in my life before. And the questioning went on with that person, and then Swami Radha said, "Who's next?" And I think this just might be an exception in my lifetime. I leapt into the middle of the room and said, "I am." So it was just, I had reservations that had disappeared. There I was in the center of the room. And it's a dream that I still have, and it still informs me. But I think most of all, it just delights me, because even then I knew that this is where it all started. So quite wonderful.
Wow. So your first entry then was really the dream yoga as Swami Radha's method. Yes. And will you say a little bit about the dream method, like in case someone's listening and they're not super familiar, kind of the dream method and what is meant by dream workshop?
So Swami Radha's approach to dreams I sometimes listen to scientists and think, gosh, why don't they just read her book? Because
Yes.
far from it being this sort of garbage in, garbage out, it's revealing to us the innermost conversation. Sometimes dreams have been called God's forgotten language. And that is where the unconscious speaks to us. And the method takes us, it puts us in that conversation, revealing itself. They're very personal. They don't, there can be a more generalized level of symbolic understanding and shared meaning, but the dreams are intensely personal, operate on many levels. And her method, I think, sort of, for me, it really engages me in my own mind and how it's unfolding, and places me right where I am always. And there's a zest and an excitement about that kind of exploration. It is an approach that I find really wonderful to the question of who am I? Because the dreams unfold and show me over and over various aspects of myself and who I am, where I am. They place me.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. The symbols and how our dreams can show us what a part of us may already know. And I think for me too, there's something about being able to carve out that time for myself of sitting down with my dreams and looking at them and like kind of appreciating what my mind and my consciousness is showing me.
It's a way of taking ourselves seriously in the really right way of doing that. That's that exploration, investigation, and yes, they're wonderful.
And realization.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And so you meet her in the workshop and you're there for the weekend. What happens next? How does your relationship with Swami Radha continue to develop? And how do you feel after the workshop?
Oh, really zesty, stirred up, inquisitive, more. And I was very fortunate because that same group of women in Lethbridge were still there. And in those days, Swami Radha traveled, and she traveled wherever she felt there were fertile soil. And so my relationship with her really intertwines with both Swami Jyotiananda and Swami Radhananda, because they started offering workshops in their home. And Swami Radha made herself available. In fact, one really precious memory I have is of her standing in the doorway. It was a lighted doorway at Susan's house, Jyotiananda's, at the end of an evening. And she stood there namasteing to me and simply said, "Call me anytime, just phone me." And she had the most incredible light in her eyes and warmth emanating from her. It really was a total welcome. And then, we had workshops. As the years went by, numbers of people started to come, attracted to the light. And so we started having workshops in our home. And just on that sort of expression of her availability and her insight, I would say, she was coming to the house. We were having a workshop. I walked towards her to welcome her, and I hadn't said a word. She turned to her companion and she said, she's doing the work. So that was another way that she just seemed to me to cultivate this encouragement and availability. I think another thing I really would like to say about her is that she was incredibly generous and grateful. She never, in all the years that we had workshops, my husband would leave for the weekend. The workshop would take over the house. And never did she come that she didn't ask me personally to thank him for. So she didn't take things for granted either, you know? Yeah, that was an aspect of her humility.
And her acknowledging like what was, you know, in some way in your family, like sacrificed for her to be there and to be present in that way.
Right.
Awareness. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. And so would you call her? She said, call me anytime.
I didn't. Gratefully, she was frequently there. So we were blessed. We had classes. So we were doing classes. Julie, Swami Lalitananda joined us as we were still meeting in a lovely small space at Swami Jyotiananda's house. And so we were having weekly classes right away. Swami Jyotiananda came back bringing us the light invocation. And when she came back, she had a workshop. And so there was our gateway to everything else. And right away, we started having Kundalini classes and workshops. Didn't matter whether it was in the garage, small garage, or Radhananda's home, or eventually my home. Sometimes more public places, a couple of times. And so we were really fed by a tremendous thread always of, well, doing the work, learning the teaching, dancing. We danced. And Swami Radha would be there frequently twice a year, spring and fall. That's fuel.
Yeah, nourishment,
yes.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The flowers getting their nourishment from the sunshine.
Right.
Did you, so, you know, you're going to these workshops and you're hosting some of them too. And then did you do the yoga development course?
I did. Yes, I did do that. That was 1987 that I did. And it just was the kind of foundation that I needed for everything else and to keep going. And, you know, when you say in some ways my family sacrificed, in most ways, maybe all ways, I also feel that these teachings saved my family because things changed in my family after the, then it was called the YTC, the Yoga Teachers Course, and it became a threshold to a whole different way of us living our lives, including that my husband commuted. And so many, I did a life seal, an early life seal with Swami Radha. And one of the themes that came out of it, a major theme that came out of it, was of expectations. And so what had happened was that through her teachings, through the YTC, the Yoga Development Course, my concepts had been tremendously loosened. And as a result, my reality loosened as well. And very positive, generative things were able to happen because I wasn't keeping this tight control on what it was supposed to be like. And it got breathing space to be, first of all, what it actually was, but then blossoming into what it could become.
And on that note, I mean, you've already shared so many little memories that you have of Swami Radha. But is there one in particular, you know, not particularly from the beginning of knowing her, but maybe the later years, like a memory that kind of stands out for you at this time in your life?
Oh, dear. Absolutely. You know, we danced for her. We had a little dance troupe. in Lethbridge, and we danced for her. And one of the times that we danced, we were invited, our little dance troupe was invited to, on her 80th birthday, to dance in the garden for her. Well, it was just her puja and her 80th birthday was very special as I approached that very age myself. It seems quite surprising. But when we had the puja, which was just full of light and flowers and a baby that she would hold, and baby Krishna came to her during that 80th birthday. And I can remember bowing before her and just feeling such overwhelming gratitude and humility. And her eyes were just tenderly holding me. And she just said, just keep going. That's all she said. And it's been an inspiration for every other step of the way. So that's the kind of availability that and warmth that she could, that she just conveyed. And that was, I just feel that I trust every inch of the way from that time. I leapt into the middle of the room saying, pick me, I'm next. That it was just this unfolding of the trust on very deep levels.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. There's the trust that you had, but then also, like you said, the availability that she provided. And you used the term tender eyes that she had.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was, that to me is the spiritual mothering part, that it was an indescribable look of love.
Well, the indescribable look of love leads us so well into our theme for the day, Tara. That was a great segue of compassion. And in part, I picked this theme for our conversation today, knowing, your initiated name of Tara. But then also, it's been something that I've been working with myself, and self-compassion and compassion for my colleagues and people I interact with on a daily basis. And before I have a little quote I thought I would read, but do you want to say something first about compassion and what it means to you in relation to your name?
Well, it's a very big feeling, and I feel it's a landscape that can't easily be sort of compressed and defined, but it's a word that's very glibly used, sort of like love, forgiveness, and we all know what it means, and more importantly, how it expresses itself. So there is a shared level of understanding I think there's a shared level of understanding that it means being able to feel with another situation. But in the practice of it, as a spiritual practice, it's far more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I think it's very layered. And I'm just now remembering, I was reading a book a few years ago, and it was breaking down the kind of etymology of the word compassion, and it's Latin. It has some Latin roots, cum and passio, and which essentially means with suffering. And I remember always thinking that was really, just very clear for me, that concept of being empathetic. But then, as you're saying, there's also the other layers of it that I hope we touch on in our conversation. But before we talk more about it, I thought I would just read a short passage from Kundalini Yoga for the West by Swami Shivananda Radha. And it's her speaking about the power of the chakras and compassion. And she writes, compassion can be seen in 3 stages. At first, it is expressed only to friends and loved ones. Then you are moved by the suffering of an unknown but worthy individual whose plight is brought to your attention. Finally, when your concern can extend to include the violent, the drunken, the downtrodden. Your compassion approaches the divine. So that connection of what you're saying too, of that multi-layeredness, like words such as love or even harmony. You're right, like these words that we use and we talk about, but then what does it really mean to love, or what does it really mean to feel compassion or be compassionate?
And how does it express itself? Because it's not a sentiment, it's an action. And so the multi-layeredness for me and the practice of compassion it's a practice in listening. It's a practice in discernment, in an interpersonal sense of whether to speak or whether not to speak. It's cultivated. And I think Swami Radha says that too, also in the Kundalini book, that we have to deal with our own emotions before we can allow that finer feeling of compassion to really flow. So for me, it's very much a active thing, even if I'm not speaking, even if I'm silent. It's a finer feeling. It's free of judgment. So I can't have an agenda if it's going to really, if it's this connection that we make with another, or even, how we receive the daily news. What do we do with that? I guess I would circle back actually to the universal prayer. It's an understanding heart. It's a balanced mind. It's equal vision. And all of those things are at play in the refinement of this beautiful quality of emotion, of compassion. It's because the balanced mind is the kind of discernment Swami Radha had of a commitment not to leave a person in their pain and suffering. How do we help? What is helpful? And being willing to discern, to allow for the insight to come through us as to what does another person actually need. It's different than kindness. It's different than consideration.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too. Like it's different than what you said, kindness, of kind of just being nice to someone. Like there's something about compassion that holds the highest potential of the other person or yourself in mind.
Exactly. In fact, I think that you have to put niceness aside to be able to feel it. You might end up being nice, but if that's what you want, you're missing the point. And nobody showed that more than Swami Radha. So she knew what her commitment was, which was to take us out of the suffering of delusion, self-created suffering and pain. And of course, she had insight beyond what could be described. And so she couldn't care about being liked. She had to get out of her way. I have to get out of my way in that way too. I find particularly that's in the closest relationships I have. That's where that kind of really active discernment is called for. And it's a practice for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like a specific moment in mind of when Swami Radha showed you compassion, or that kind of exemplified what compassion might look like?
Yes, I do. It's a very life seal that I did, which is impactful until this day. I was sitting beside her looking at the seals. And she said to me, we'd had some questioning already, and she said to me, you know, sometimes I let people take workshop after workshop and they don't get anywhere. Sometimes I decide to give it to them all at once. And so I sat there I think I probably stopped breathing. I know I was quaking. I was waiting. She was going to give it to me all at once. And there was my seal sitting up in front of me. And I waited, seemed a long time, and she cleared her throat, took a drink of water, and went on to an entirely different topic. And I went home at the end of the day shaken. My teachers would say that I was appropriately loosened. And just with this wondering, why didn't she give it to me all at once? And hugely, what is it she saw? And so young people won't remember these days, but we used to have cassette tapes, and we would tape all of our sessions, and we would then sit beside a ghetto blaster and put 3 words out and then write it down and transcribe quite laboriously the entire transcript of what the session was. And of course, the whole time I was looking and wondering why she hadn't said what she had prepared me for. So literally 9 months later, a known gestation period, I was reading over the transcript yet again, looking at my pictures yet again, and I got it. She had already said what she wanted to say. And that her comments were the after, telling me, I've given it to you all at once. And I wasn't ready until 9 months later. And what she was talking about, I've touched on it actually at other times as we've been chatting, was expectations. Expectations are deadening and they're deadly. And I don't think it's any surprise that I still work with that today. So it was a very, I see it as a compassionate way of doing her work. She'd said it, she'd put it out there, and then just waiting. And I did get it. And nobody else, this is one of the things I love about the teachings, nobody else intervened and said, well, don't you get what she was saying? People left that process to me, my own understanding, which is what makes these teachings so personally impactful. When you get it, and it doesn't go away. So I see that as compassion. And it's fierce. She could be very fierce, very direct, because she didn't want to leave us in the kind of illusion, my case, expectations. She wanted us to see the light.
Okay. Well, and that word that you just touched on, that fierceness, is something that I've heard a lot, like that idea of fierce compassion. I've heard that terminology a lot at the ashram. And what does that mean to you, like fierce compassion, and how? Because I definitely see it in my relationship with the different teachers, but I wonder how it's kind of shown up for you in your relationship with Swami Radha.
Well, I think it is that particular kind of love and compassion that refuses to fluff the pillows if what a person needs is real help. The help that is really going to move me, a student, along to a understanding that is freeing. And it can feel fierce. The ego certainly feels it as fierce. And of course, most of it takes place publicly in the sense of being in a workshop. And so there's layers of ego protection there. And that's not who Swami Radha talked to. That's not who she was there for. She saw who we are in the much, much bigger sense. That's who she talked to. And that could be feel fierce on the kind of human level, but was for me always ultimately freeing. And then the process becomes our teacher. So that's the gift of the reflection to me, is that we don't leave it there. It starts to work us. The process works us.
Can you say that again? The process becomes the teacher?
Yes, because we're being taught constantly awareness. And like we were saying with Swami Radha, that she says we have to do the work on our own emotions before we can get to compassion.
Well, and to kind of bring it back to you and your relationship to the teachings, how do you connect now? I mean, you're living in Victoria and not too far away from the ashram. How do the teachings show up in your life now?
Well, that gives me an opportunity to mention something that my husband, when he found out told him I was doing this, he immediately said, well, you have to tell them that nary a day goes by that you don't say Swami Radha says, or well Swami Radha would say. So it's a very active. I have been well steeped in the teachings, and I'm both in Victoria and Alberta. And so I don't get to the ashram as frequently as I would like to. But so I do teach with the Alberta Teachers Group. And it's lovely because we've got a group of 5 teachers, which means that we can teach part of the time and be a student part of the time. So that is the active way that the work keeps going in that way. And I also do the Hatha class with people that have been with me for 35 years. And of course, Zoom. In fact, this week, one person was in Maui, one person was in Tofino, and the rest were in Lethbridge. So I keep it going. I keep it going through the practices. And I have to say, I was blessed for many, many years, 40 years actually, by a group. And that group for a lot of that time met in my own home, which was a privilege beyond description. I don't have that kind of a group. And I often think of the numbers of people who go to the ashram and leave without the kind of support that I've known all the way through. Because I do feel the absence of a group right now, other than the fact that our Alberta Teachers Group is a small group in itself. So that's a continuing thread. And the practices themselves are generative, and life brings to us, I feel that I used to say that the Kundalini system was the framework, but I don't feel it in that way anymore. It's more that it is just so expressive in everything that's happening all the time. There isn't anything happening that I can't bring back to some kind of an awareness of the teachings or of the practices. So it's a bit more solitary kind of work than I've known before, but I also don't feel alone in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that whole thing of not feeling alone in it, I saw like the email that was going around about, the ashram celebrating 60 years, and they've asked people who've been connected to commit to some sort of practice as an offering to Swami Radha, and kind of that idea that through the practices, we are all connected, and in the light, we're all connected.
Right. I've really had the experience of my husband had cancer. We went on the prayer list, which I now perpetually am on the prayer list, and my family. But during that time of surgeries, treatments, etc., there was a truly tangible feeling of support. And I thought, this is the real web. There is a web that's strong, supporting us all the time. Once I have opened to what it is, but there is the support and foundation. It literally becomes tangible.
Well, and certainly all your stories have felt very tangible and real and alive. And I am so grateful that you've shared them with me and have been in this very active conversation. It's felt very heart-filling. Is there anything you want to say as kind of like closing remarks? Or maybe there's one more memory that's like, oh, I have to talk about this too. Is there anything that's coming to mind?
Oh, my. Well, one of the things that you had earlier suggested we might chat about is, what would I say to young people coming? What would I say? And what came to mind for me is, I don't know where this expression originated, but know thyself and be free. And Swami Rana had a note card, personal note card, with that written on it. And to young people, or all people, I really would say all people, that's what I would invite people to, is that knowing that takes us beyond the limitations, beyond some of the suffering, and frees us. And I feel that the ashram, the teachings are, they're evergreen, they're ever renewing, they're available. And now, of course, with electronic connection, they really are available so much more broadly. And the examples of people who have been working with these teachings, even a short time, we can see the freedom and the joy unfold.
Oh, thank you so much, Tara, for joining me and for agreeing to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. And yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Swami Radha Ki Jai. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Yasodhara Ashram is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and Sinixt peoples. You can learn more about the ashram by visiting our website at yasodhara.org. You can also follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Katie Taher, and this is My Time with Radha.